My boyfriend won't stop giggling with my female coworker and teaching her his native language. Vera started at my waitressing job 4 months ago, and the moment she saw my boyfriend Haido, she decided he was hers. When she saw us having lunch for the first time, she waited until I got up to use the bathroom, then sat down in my seat next to his. She pressed her hips against his and flashed a flirty smile before saying, "Konnichiwa." You see, my boyfriend is half Japanese like me, and Vera hated that we had something to bond over that she couldn't be a part of. So when he awkwardly said it back, she saw this as her chance. She grabbed a pair of chopsticks and started trying to eat her noodles, complaining about whitewashed girls appropriating his beautiful culture, very obviously referring to me. When I came back from the bathroom, she told me to grab a chair, telling me I was welcome to join in on their conversation. It definitely struck a nerve, but I was so secure in Haido and I's relationship I didn't even mind, until Vera started trying to implode us. She'd corner him when I wasn't looking and tell him innuendo-style phrases in Japanese that she got off Google Translate. Whenever we were talking, she'd always squeeze past us, very slowly, sometimes making sure to rub her behind against Haido, and other times facing him directly, and giving him the F me eyes. The thing that really made me mad was when she asked Haito to come teach her Japanese at her house after work. I was going to confront her there and then, but we were in the middle of a very busy service, and I told myself I'd do it right after. Big mistake. You see, at some point during service, these important Japanese businessmen came in for food. They were at my section, but Vera practically shoved me aside to serve them. "Please speak Japanese. I understand everything," she told them. They looked pleasantly surprised and started rattling off their order with specific modifications and allergies. Vera just kept saying, "Hi, hi," while scribbling nonsense. 45 minutes later, it was chaos. One guy got served the wrong starter. Another received 2 sushi orders instead of his chicken chow mein. And the third guy actually started having an allergic reaction to shellfish, which he asked to exclude. That's when Vera did it. While Haido ran to get the EpiPen, she pointed at me and told her cousin, who was the manager, that I changed the order to sabotage her. And without verifying anything, her cousin wrote me up on the spot in front of everyone. "One more incident and you're terminated." I went home crushed and just cried to Haido. I was wondering if just quitting was my best option, until Haido suggested something. If she wants me to teach her Japanese, let's do exactly that. Over the next few weeks, we set our plan into place. At the restaurant, Haito and I feigned relationship problems, and of course, Vera jumped at the opportunity to comfort him. She started sitting next to him again, placing his hand on her shoulder, getting dangerously close. And then Haito went for it. He offered to teach her Japanese. Not at her house, just here in the restaurant, but she jumped at it like SpongeBob hearing the Goofy Goober song. Before I knew it, they were in the back together, laughing at each other and grinning ear to ear. Haito was teaching her phrases, and she was listening to him with puppy eyes and repeating everything in the most seductive anime e-girl voice she could put on. Me and Haito would exchange quick glances, trying not to laugh because these phrases were just ridiculous. Very soon, he convinced her to start saying these phrases to customers. I would waitress next to her and hear her say, "Kuso baba," meaning crappy old hag, to an elderly Japanese lady. I would have to clench my jaw tight so I wouldn't laugh. Another absolute gem I heard from here in one day alone were "Busu shine," meaning ugly beach, go die, to a little 7-year-old girl with autism. What made the whole situation so much better was how every time after insulting a customer, she'd run to Haito to tell him she did it like she was a 4-year-old old kid, showing you how quickly she could eat her crayon. All while Haito would just smile at her and tell her she was doing great. For weeks, Vera insulted customers in Japanese, telling them "Kuso kuta shine," eat shit and die, "Omae no senzo wo faku shiro," F your ancestors, or my personal favorite, "Ore baka dakedo wakateru tsumori," I'm stupid and think I know what I'm saying. But then the owner's mother's 85th birthday party happened. She was fully Japanese and seeing her son for the first time in 3 years. The owner was there, and they reserved an entire section to themselves. It was set to be an amazing night. Vera was waitressing, and that's when Haito did it. He convinced her to go take the woman's order and told Vera to take it in Japanese, which she did. She went up to the owner's mother, and with the confidence of a Bradley Martin in a street fight with an MMA fighter said, "Konnichiwa, kuso baba tsukaenai, ketsu ni kisu shiro," meaning, "Hello, you dumb, old, good-for-nothing beach. Kiss my behind." The restaurant went silent. The owner's face went from normal to white in about 2 seconds, and I watched his hands start shaking as he gripped the edge of the table. His mom just sat there frozen with her mouth open, staring at Vera like she couldn't believe what just happened. Every single person at the birthday party table had stopped talking and turned to look at Vera, who was still standing there with this huge smile on her face, like she'd just done something amazing. The owner pushed his chair back real slow and stood up, and when he spoke, his voice was so quiet it was actually scarier than if he'd yelled. "Could you please repeat what you just said to my mother?" Vera straightened up and repeated the whole thing again, even louder this time, and she actually did this little bow at the end like she was performing on stage or something. The owner's mom started talking to him in Japanese, really fast, and her voice was shaking, and that's when I saw it happen. The exact second Vera's smile started to fade because she realized something was really, really wrong. The owner turned to Vera and asked her where she learned those words, and his tone made it super clear this wasn't a friendly question anymore. Vera immediately pointed straight at Haido and said he'd been teaching her Japanese for weeks, and told her this was the perfect birthday greeting for his mother. The owner looked over at Haido, who just kept his face completely blank, not giving anything away. Before Haido could say anything, I stepped forward and told the owner I needed to explain something really important about what's been happening here. My voice was shaking a bit, but I kept going, telling him there was context he really needed to know about this whole situation. The owner looked at his mom and said something in Japanese, then turned back to us and told Vera, Haido, Daryl, and me to follow him to his office right now. We all walked through the restaurant with everyone watching us, and I could feel my heart pounding as we went into the back hallway toward his office. The second we got inside, Vera started talking super fast, saying she was the victim here and that we'd set her up on purpose. She kept going on about how Haido had offered to teach her Japanese so she could connect better with customers and make the restaurant look good. The owner held up his hand to stop her and asked her to translate exactly what she thought she'd said to his mother. Vera got this confident look again and said she'd wished his mother a happy birthday and told her how beautiful and wise she was. The owner grabbed a piece of paper from his desk, wrote something down, and slid it across to her. Vera picked it up and read it, and I swear her face went from red to white to green in about 3 seconds flat. The owner asked why Haido would teach her such horrible things to say, and that's when I finally spoke up. I told him about the past 4 months, how Vera had been cornering Haido when I wasn't around, touching him inappropriately, pressing herself against him in the kitchen. I explained how she'd been trying to break us up, constantly flirting with him right in front of me, making him super uncomfortable every single day. Daryl immediately jumped in, saying I was making everything up because I was jealous of Vera being better at her job than me. He brought up the Japanese businessman from that night, telling the owner how I'd supposedly sabotaged Vera's orders to make her look bad. The owner's eyes got narrow, and he asked for more details about what exactly happened that night with those customers. I pulled out my phone and showed him the photos I'd been smart enough to take of the original order tickets from that night. They showed Vera's handwriting clear as day, just complete nonsense scribbles that didn't look like any actual food orders at all. The owner took my phone and looked at the photos really carefully while Daryl started shifting around in his chair looking super uncomfortable. Vera suddenly started crying, saying she just wanted to learn about Japanese culture because she respected it so much and thought it was beautiful. She kept saying I'd always been mean to her from day one, and that I'd turned Haido against her because I was threatened by her. The owner looked at her and asked why she never just used Google Translate or took actual Japanese classes if she really wanted to learn the language properly. Vera started stammering something about not having time for classes when we heard a knock on the office door. Mika Yamaguchi poked her head in and told the owner his mother was getting worried about him, and the birthday guests were starting to ask questions. The owner rubbed his forehead and told Mika to give everyone free desserts and apologize for the delay. Mika nodded but didn't leave right away. Instead, she shifted her weight from foot to foot and said she had something she needed to share about Vera if he had a minute. The owner waved her in, and Mika closed the door behind her, then started telling him about all the times she'd heard Vera in the break room making fun of Asian customers. She described how Vera would do fake accents, pretend to bow while laughing, and joke about how they all ordered the same boring food. Daryl immediately jumped up from his chair saying Mika was just mad because Vera got better tips than her. The owner's hand slammed down on his desk so hard that everyone jumped, and he told Daryl to sit down and shut up. Before anyone could say anything else, Nathan Soto knocked and stuck his head in, saying he had something urgent to show the owner on the security footage. We all followed Nathan down the narrow hallway to the small security room where he pulled up the monitor and started clicking through dates. He found what he was looking for from 3 weeks ago and hit play on the grainy footage. The video showed the kitchen during a slow afternoon shift, and there was Vera backing Haido into the corner between the prep counter and the wall. She had her whole body pressed against him while he tried to lean away but had nowhere to go. Her hands were on his chest, and she was moving them lower when Haido finally managed to duck under her arm and escape to the other side of the kitchen. The owner watched the footage again, his face getting darker each time Vera pressed herself against my boyfriend. He turned to Daryl and asked if anyone had ever filed harassment complaints about this kind of behavior. Daryl's face went red, and he mumbled that Vera had mentioned some people were jealous of her, but he never thought it was serious. The owner's voice got real quiet, which was scarier than yelling, as he asked exactly how many complaints there had been. Daryl looked at the floor and admitted there were at least 5 different staff members who'd come to him about Vera's behavior, but he thought they were just trying to get her in trouble. Sophia Ward showed up at the doorway holding a thick folder and said she'd been going through customer feedback forms from the past 2 weeks. She spread them out on the small desk, and they were all complaints about a rude waitress saying offensive things in what sounded like Japanese. The dates matched up perfectly with when Vera started using the phrases Haido had taught her. The owner picked up each form and read them slowly, his jaw getting tighter with each one. One elderly couple wrote that their waitress had said something that sounded like a death threat to their granddaughter. Another customer who spoke some Japanese said the waitress had told him to do something disgusting to his ancestors. The owner looked at everyone in the tiny security room and told them all to get out except for me and Haido. Vera tried to protest, but Sophia grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the door, while Daryl and the others filed out. Once the door clicked shut, the owner sat down in the chair and looked straight at us. His voice was calm, but I could see his hands shaking slightly as he asked if we'd deliberately taught Vera those horrible phrases as revenge for what she'd been doing. Haido and I looked at each other, and I knew we had to come clean about everything. I took a deep breath and started from the very beginning with that first lunch when Vera sat in my seat and pressed herself against Haido. I told him about the constant harassment, the inappropriate touching, the attempts to break us up, and how she'd corner Haido when I wasn't around. I explained about the Japanese businessmen and how one almost died from his allergy, while Vera blamed me and got me written up by Daryl, who believed her without even checking. I admitted that yes, we taught her those phrases on purpose because I was desperate and felt like nobody would help me keep my job. The owner listened to the whole story without interrupting once, just sitting there with his fingers pressed against his temples. When I finished, Haido spoke up and said he'd initially told me no, but changed his mind after seeing how much Vera's behavior was destroying me. He said he took full responsibility for teaching her the phrases and understood if the owner wanted to fire him for it. The owner leaned back in the chair until it creaked and rubbed his face with both hands. He finally said he was disappointed in what we'd done, but understood why we felt we had no other choice given how Daryl had completely failed to manage the situation properly. He said what we did was wrong, but what Vera did was worse because she chose to use phrases she didn't understand just to impress people and make herself look good. He stood up and said he needed time to figure out what to do with everyone involved, but first he had to get back to his mother's birthday party. We walked back to the dining room where all the birthday guests were whispering to each other and looking around nervously. The owner's mother was sitting at the head of the table with her hands folded, watching her son walk toward her. The owner pulled up a chair next to his mother, and they had a long conversation in Japanese while everyone in the restaurant watched. His mother kept nodding and occasionally looking over at Vera, who was standing by the kitchen door with her arms wrapped around herself, looking absolutely terrified. The owner's mother slowly pushed back her chair and stood up, her small frame somehow commanding the attention of everyone in the restaurant. She walked straight toward Vera with measured steps, her face calm but her eyes sharp. When she stopped in front of Vera, she spoke in clear English with just a hint of an accent. I have been called names before, but never by someone who claims to respect my culture. Her voice carried across the silent dining room. Real respect means taking time to learn, not playing dress up with someone's heritage. Vera's face went from white to red and she opened her mouth, but no words came out. The owner stood up next and cleared his throat loudly. He announced that there would be immediate changes to management and staff starting right away. He apologized to all the guests for the disruption and told them everyone would receive 50% off their meals tonight. Then he looked directly at Daryl, Vera, Haido, and me and told us to meet him first thing tomorrow morning. The birthday guests started whispering among themselves and slowly began eating again, though the mood was completely ruined. The owner helped his mother back to her seat and they continued talking quietly in Japanese. The rest of the shift was the most awkward 3 hours of my life. Vera stayed in the corner by the dish pit, not looking at anyone or taking any tables. Daryl stomped around barking orders at everyone, but nobody really listened to him anymore. The other servers kept shooting looks between me, Haido, and Vera, trying to figure out exactly what had happened. I just kept my head down and focused on my tables, counting down the minutes until closing. Every time I passed Vera, she looked smaller, like she was trying to disappear into the wall. Daryl kept trying to assert his authority, but it was obvious to everyone that his days as manager were numbered. The kitchen staff kept poking their heads out to watch the drama unfold. Finally, we locked the doors and started the closing routine. I was wiping down tables when Mika came up to me with Nathan right behind her. She put her hand on my shoulder and said she was proud of me for finally standing up to Vera. She mentioned that lots of other staff had stories about Vera's behavior and how Daryl always took her side. Nathan nodded and added that the kitchen crew had been watching this mess for months. They both said they would back me up if the owner asked them anything tomorrow. I thanked them and finished my closing duties as fast as possible. Haido and I drove home in silence for the first few minutes. Then we started talking about what we'd done and whether we'd gone too far with our revenge plan. We both felt terrible about the owner's mother being hurt and humiliated at her own birthday party. That wasn't what we wanted at all. We just wanted Vera to face some consequences for once. We stayed up until 3 in the morning going over everything, wondering if we'd lose our jobs tomorrow. We agreed that if we somehow kept our jobs, we needed to find a way to apologize to the owner's mother properly. Neither of us slept well that night. The next morning, we got to the restaurant 30 minutes early and found Sophia already there with stacks of paperwork spread across 3 tables. There were termination forms, policy manuals, and what looked like new employee contracts. Daryl showed up looking angry and defensive. Vera came in last, her eyes red and puffy from crying. The owner walked in exactly at 9 and didn't waste any time. He looked straight at Daryl and told him he was demoted to server effective immediately. Daryl started to protest, but the owner cut him off with a raised hand. You're lucky to still have a job at all after your complete failure as a manager. Daryl's face turned purple, but he shut his mouth. The owner then turned to Vera and his expression got even harder. He told her she was fired for harassment, creating a hostile work environment and damaging the restaurant's reputation. Vera completely broke down, sobbing and begging for another chance. She promised she'd change and never do anything like that again. The owner stayed firm and handed her the termination papers. "Clean out your locker and leave immediately." Vera took the papers with shaking hands and stumbled toward the back room, still crying. The owner looked at Haido and me next, and my stomach dropped. He said what we did was unethical and could have seriously damaged the restaurant if word got out to customers. However, he recognized that we were driven to it by management's complete failure to protect employees from harassment. He was giving us one final chance, but we were both on probation for 3 months. Any incidents during that time, and we'd be terminated immediately. Additionally, we both had to write formal apology letters to his mother and attend cultural sensitivity training at our own expense. Haido would also have to teach Japanese to any staff who wanted to learn, but properly this time with real lessons. We both agreed immediately, grateful we still had jobs. Sophia stepped forward with the new policy manuals and started explaining the changes she was implementing as the new manager. There would be proper procedures for reporting harassment with real investigations. She scheduled a mandatory all-staff meeting for that afternoon to go over everything. She made it clear that favoritism and retaliation would not be tolerated under her management. The whole atmosphere in the restaurant started changing almost immediately. Over the next few days, Mika came to Sophia with a whole notebook she'd been keeping about Vera's behavior for months. She showed Sophia pages of dates and times when Vera would mock Asian customers in the break room. Nathan brought screenshots of text messages where Vera bragged about getting me in trouble with Daryl. 3 other servers came forward with stories about Vera touching them inappropriately or making racist comments. Sophia sat at a corner table for hours typing everything into official incident reports on her laptop. She created a thick folder with all the documentation and scheduled mandatory training sessions for the entire staff. The owner approved paying everyone for 2 extra hours each week to complete workplace respect training. Meanwhile, I sat at my kitchen table that night staring at a blank piece of paper. I wanted to write the perfect apology letter to the owner's mother, but kept starting over. I explained how we never meant for her to get hurt, and how sorry I was that our stupid revenge plan ruined her birthday. I told her about feeling trapped when nobody would listen to me about Vera's harassment. I mentioned how much I respected her son and the restaurant that had become like a second home to me. Then I remembered the photo album I'd been making for the restaurant's anniversary that was still in my car. I'd spent 3 months collecting old photos from longtime customers and staff members. There were pictures from the grand opening 20 years ago and newspaper clippings about the restaurant winning local awards. I wrapped it carefully and included it with my letter as a small apology gift. Haido wrote his own letter at his apartment, taking full responsibility for teaching Vera those horrible phrases. A week later, I was refilling salt shakers when the owner's mother walked through the door. My stomach twisted into knots as she asked Sophia if we could talk. Sophia led us to a quiet booth in the back where the owner's mother sat across from us. Her face looked softer than I expected, not angry like I'd imagined for days. She pulled our letters from her purse and set them on the table. She told us she'd read them multiple times and could feel our genuine remorse. She said the photo album made her cry because it showed how much the restaurant meant to the community. Then she started telling us about coming to America 40 years ago and facing constant mockery for her accent. She described people making fake karate sounds at her and pulling their eyes back to mock her appearance. She said Vera's insult reminded her of those painful early years when she felt so alone and misunderstood. But she also understood what it felt like to have nobody listen when you're being mistreated. She said she forgave us but made us promise to handle problems better in the future. Then she surprised us by offering to come teach real Japanese to the staff once a week. She wanted everyone to understand that language and culture aren't costumes but bridges between people. Her eyes got watery as she explained how teaching would help her feel useful in her retirement. We both thanked her repeatedly, feeling overwhelmed by her kindness after everything we'd done. Meanwhile, Daryl was struggling badly in his new role as a server. I watched him drop a tray of drinks on his second day and mix up 3 orders during lunch rush. He kept trying to boss other servers around out of habit, but they just ignored him. One server who Daryl had written up 6 months ago watched him fumble with the credit card machine with a small smile. Daryl's face stayed red and angry throughout every shift as he dealt with difficult customers he used to make us handle. I heard from another restaurant manager friend that Daryl had applied to 5 different places, but got rejected from all of them. Word had spread quickly through our local restaurant community about what happened with Vera. The story got more dramatic with each retelling, and soon every restaurant owner in town knew about the harassment and the fake Japanese incident. A server from the Italian place down the street told me Vera applied there and got turned down immediately. My friend at the steakhouse said Vera's application went straight into the trash. Someone else mentioned seeing Vera at the unemployment office looking defeated. A mutual acquaintance later told me Vera had packed up and moved to another city to stay with her aunt. Part of me felt a tiny bit bad, but then I remembered her pressing against Haido and the feeling went away. The owner's mother started her Japanese classes the following Tuesday, and half the staff showed up. She didn't just teach words, but explained the history and meaning behind them. She brought traditional tea sets and showed us proper etiquette for serving and receiving. She told stories about growing up in Osaka and taught us about different regional dialects. More staff members started attending each week, genuinely interested in learning. Regular customers began noticing servers using proper Japanese greetings and seemed impressed by the authentic cultural knowledge. We started getting more Japanese families as customers who heard about our respectful approach to their culture. 3 months flew by with Sophia running the restaurant better than it had ever been run before. She gave Haido and me our final probation review in her office with big smiles. She wrote that we'd become examples of professional growth and workplace leadership. The owner came in specifically to remove our probation status and handed us both small raise letters. Haido immediately started working on ideas for a cultural exchange program with the Japanese Cultural Center downtown. He spent hours creating presentations about bringing in guest chefs and hosting traditional tea ceremonies. He met with the Cultural Center director twice and came back excited about the possibilities. The owner loved Haido's initiative and officially put him in charge of developing the whole program. It felt like Haido was turning his guilt into something that actually honored his heritage properly. The restaurant felt completely different now, like a place where people actually wanted to work. Sophia had implemented anonymous complaint boxes and actually read every single submission. She held monthly staff meetings where everyone could speak openly about concerns. The kitchen staff and servers worked together better without Daryl's favoritism causing problems. Even our regular customers commented on how much happier everyone seemed. The change happened faster than I expected. Within 2 weeks, we started getting new customers who'd heard about how the owner handled the whole mess with Vera. They'd come in asking if this was the place that stood up to harassment. Online reviews started popping up mentioning how respectful the staff was and how the owner actually cared about creating a good workplace. One review specifically said they loved supporting a business that didn't tolerate discrimination. Business picked up so much that we had to add extra shifts on weekends. The owner had to hire 3 new servers just to keep up with the dinner rush. Sophia ran everything smoothly and made sure every new hire understood our zero-tolerance policy for harassment. She held weekly meetings where anyone could bring up concerns without fear. The kitchen staff started working better with the front of house now that Daryl wasn't playing favorites anymore. Even the food seemed to taste better when everyone wasn't stressed about workplace drama. 6 months passed and Daryl still struggled with being a regular server. He kept trying to boss people around out of habit, but nobody listened to him anymore. He'd mess up orders because he wasn't used to actually working instead of just managing. One Tuesday he came in and told Sophia he got a job at some chain restaurant across town. Nobody threw him a goodbye party. His last shift was awkward with him sulking in the corner between tables. When he finally left, carrying his apron in a plastic bag, the whole restaurant felt lighter. Sophia called a staff meeting that same day and announced she was promoting Mika to assistant manager. Everyone clapped because Mika had actually earned it through hard work and dedication. The owner's mother started coming in 3 times a week instead of just for her classes. She'd sit at the bar during slow periods and chat with whoever was working. She taught us words while we rolled silverware or filled salt shakers. She'd help in the kitchen when we got slammed, showing the cooks traditional techniques her grandmother taught her. One time she spent 4 hours teaching our head chef how to make proper dashi from scratch. She brought in old photos from Japan and told us stories about running her family's noodle shop before she met the owner's father. The staff started calling her Obasen, which means grandmother, and she'd get this huge smile every time. She'd sneak us treats she made at home, these amazing rice balls with different fillings. When servers had bad days, she'd pull them aside and give them pep talks in her mix of Japanese and English. She turned what could have been an awful memory into something that brought us all together. Almost a year after the whole Vera incident, the owner announced he was throwing a special dinner to celebrate the restaurant's transformation. He reserved the whole place on a Sunday and invited all the staff and their families. He had the kitchen prepare this huge spread of both American and Japanese dishes. During dinner, he stood up and gave this speech about how the crisis forced him to look at what kind of business he was running. He thanked his mother for her wisdom and for showing him that respect and culture go hand in hand. He talked about how proud he was of the changes we'd all made together. His mother sat there dabbing her eyes with her napkin while everyone cheered. Then he dropped the surprise. He asked his mother to stand up and announced he was making her an official partner in the restaurant. She'd oversee all the cultural programming and help develop authentic Japanese menu items. She covered her mouth with her hands and started crying for real. Through her tears, she said she never thought at her age she'd be part of her son's business. The owner handed her official partnership papers right there at the table. She signed them with this beautiful fountain pen while everyone took pictures. The next month, Haido's cultural exchange program finally launched with this sake tasting event. The Cultural Center sent 2 instructors who worked with our staff all day preparing. We paired different types of sake with traditional dishes the owner's mother helped create. The place was packed with people genuinely interested in learning about Japanese culture the right way. Local food bloggers showed up and wrote these amazing reviews about our authentic approach. One blogger wrote that we were setting the standard for cultural appreciation in restaurants. The event was such a success that we started doing them monthly. Each one focused on a different aspect of Japanese culture, like tea ceremony or seasonal celebrations. 3 months later, Sophia called me into her office with this big grin on her face. She offered me the head server position with a nice raise. I'd be helping her train new staff on service standards and our workplace respect policies. During training sessions, I started sharing my story about what happened with Vera. I'd explain how I handled it wrong at first, but why speaking up about harassment matters. New hires would ask questions and seem to really appreciate the honesty. It felt good turning that whole mess into something that could help others. The restaurant kept improving, and 6 months later, we got nominated for a local workplace excellence award. The committee came to interview staff and observe our operations. They were impressed by the transformation in management and culture. When we won, the owner framed the award and hung it right next to a photo of his mother teaching the staff Japanese. He said it represented how something terrible led to meaningful change. During one of our cultural exchange events, Haido pulled me aside and said he had something important to ask me. My heart started racing as he got down on one knee right there in the middle of the restaurant. He proposed in both English and Japanese while the owner's mother translated for everyone. The entire staff started cheering, and even customers stood up to applaud. The owner's mother gave us her blessing in both languages and hugged us both. It felt perfect having this moment in the place where we'd been through so much together. The owner's mother immediately started planning our wedding reception at the restaurant. She met with both our families to plan something that would honor both Japanese and American traditions. She spent hours going over menu options and decorations that would represent both cultures authentically. The whole process brought everyone even closer together as we prepared for this celebration. 2 years flew by faster than I expected, and now our restaurant had exchange students coming in every week to practice their English, while we practiced Japanese with them. The owner's mother set up this whole program where local schools would bring kids for cultural workshops every Friday afternoon. We'd teach them how to use chopsticks properly, show them how to fold origami, and the kitchen staff would demonstrate making sushi rolls. The local newspaper did this big feature story about us being the most authentic Japanese restaurant in 3 counties. Food bloggers started driving hours just to try our seasonal menu that the owner's mother helped create with recipes from her hometown. We hosted traditional celebrations like Children's Day, where kids got free meals if they wore kimono and tanabata, where customers wrote wishes on colorful paper strips we hung from bamboo branches. The place was packed every single night with people wanting to experience real Japanese culture, not the fake stuff you see at chain restaurants. I was training new servers constantly because we kept needing more staff to handle all the customers. One afternoon while I was doing inventory, Sophia mentioned she'd seen something interesting on social media about Vera. She showed me this post where Vera was working at some clothing store downtown, folding shirts and organizing racks. The post said she'd been Employee of the Month twice and seemed to be doing okay for herself. Part of me wondered if getting fired taught her something about respecting other cultures, or if she just moved on to the next thing without learning anything. I hoped she actually grew from what happened instead of just playing victim and blaming everyone else for her mistakes. The owner called a staff meeting the next week and announced he'd found the perfect location for a second restaurant on the other side of town. His mother would help set up cultural programs at both locations, splitting her time between them. He looked right at Haito and me and offered us management positions at the new place, saying we'd proven ourselves over these past 2 years. We accepted immediately, excited to help build something from scratch using everything we'd learned about creating a respectful workplace. Looking back at everything that happened, from Vera's harassment to her getting fired to the restaurant becoming this amazing cultural center, I realized how much good came from such a messy situation. The owner's mother found this whole new purpose teaching people about her culture at 82 years old. Our staff became like family, supporting each other and standing up against any kind of harassment. We all learned that dealing with discrimination takes guts, but creates real change that matters. Sure, the revenge was petty, teaching Vera those fake phrases, but what grew from that whole mess turned into something way bigger and better than any of us expected. That's the takeaway from today's story. Hopefully it gives you something useful to tuck in your back pocket. If you want more tips and lessons woven into stories, subscribe so you're always a step ahead.
My wife left me at the altar, and I held the door for her on the way out. After losing my leg in Afghanistan, I spent 6 months secretly learning how to walk so I could stand at the altar for her. I dropped $40,000 of my savings on her dream wedding. Well, on the morning of our wedding, my best friend Olivia was adjusting my medals when my wife Stephanie's text came through. "I'm in the wedding hall, but I can't do this. Your PTSD, the nightmares, the missing leg, it's too much. Kyle reminds me of what love is supposed to feel like. I'm sorry." Kyle was her high school boyfriend who'd shown up the night before, just to wish us well. Kyle still had both legs, and no memories of holding his best friend's intestines inside their body in a helicopter. I went up to the wedding hall and found them together, getting ready to walk out. Stephanie's wedding dress was caught in the door. I let it loose and held the door open. "Go," I said. 200 people watched as she ran to Kyle's truck and chose another man over me. Olivia wheeled me out the side door, and for the first time since I was a child, I cried. That's when I remembered something that somehow made everything worse. My, now ex-wife, had been managing our finances since I got back from deployment. She said it was one less thing for me to worry about while I focused on recovery. I logged into our joint account and laughed like a maniac. All of our money had disappeared. The account history showed transfers to Kyle Blackwood going back 4 months. I couldn't even afford my doctor's appointments anymore. And 2 weeks later, my body started rejecting the prosthetic. The titanium was literally poisoning me from the inside. I needed emergency surgery that would cost $30,000, but when I called the insurance company, they said Stephanie had canceled the policy 3 months ago. To save money, she'd told me at the time. Olivia's dad showed up at the hospital the next morning with a check. He was a Vietnam Marine and owned a defense contracting firm. Olivia told me everything. Real soldiers don't leave anyone behind, he said. I'll make sure your bill gets paid today. For the first 3 days after surgery, Olivia never left my bedside. You don't have to sleep in that awful hospital chair, you know, I told her. Well, what if I want to? She'd respond with her tired half smile. 6 weeks later, I was learning to walk again on a cheaper prosthetic that actually fit. Olivia had basically moved into my apartment, driving me to physical therapy, cooking meals, making sure I didn't give up. 3 months into training, we decided to celebrate my first full swimming lap without stopping. We went to Chili's for food, and that's when we saw them. Kyle was in a booth with some blonde, her hand on his thigh, feeding her dessert with the same moves he probably used on Stephanie. The wedding ring on his finger caught the light. He'd been married the whole time. I pulled out my phone and recorded 10 seconds of him making out like teenagers. Olivia grabbed my hand under the table. Save it, she whispered. You'll need it later. The night I won gold in swimming at the Paralympics, everything changed. Olivia and I were in my hotel room, drinking gas station champagne, when she burst into tears. I've been in love with you since Kandahar, she said. Before the IED, before Stephanie, before any of this. She pulled out this folder she'd been keeping. It was filled with documents of Stephanie saying I was too damaged to notice missing money. You deserve someone who loved you when you were whole and loves you just as much now. We kissed, and my heart swooned. It felt like coming home from war all over again, except this time someone actually wanted me there. Olivia and I spent the next 6 months teaching each other what real love feels like. We were holding hands at the VA getting fitted for a new prosthetic when Stephanie walked in. Mascara was running down her ugly face, designer clothes wrinkled. He left me, she shrieked. Kyle went back to his wife. I lost my job. I lost everything. I need you to tell them I didn't know what I was doing. I stood up. I don't owe you anything. Drew, please. I made a mistake. You're a war hero. I can learn to deal with your condition. That's when Olivia came back from the bathroom. She looked at Stephanie and stopped dead. Is this the woman who stole your disability money while you were in surgery? Stephanie's face went white. You replaced me with her? My fiancé, I said. We're getting married next month. Same venue, actually. Stephanie lunged forward, grabbed my arms. I'm pregnant. I've been pregnant since the week of our wedding. This is your child. I stood there in shock as she slowly pulled out a paternity test from her purse. Olivia dropped both coffees. The hot coffee splashed across the floor and my feet while the papers in Stephanie's hand shook between us. My whole body went rigid, and my prosthetic made that clicking sound it does when it locks up from me standing wrong. I grabbed the wall to keep from falling over, and the metal rail felt cold under my palm. The other patients in the waiting room were all staring at us now, and some old guy in a wheelchair rolled himself backward to get away from the mess. Stephanie kept waving those papers at me and saying something about how she had proof, but I couldn't really hear her over the blood rushing in my ears. I reached out and grabbed her arm, not hard but firm enough to get her attention, and pulled her toward the side hallway where they keep the water fountains. She stumbled along in her wrinkled clothes, and I could smell stale perfume mixed with sweat coming off her. Olivia stayed back in the waiting area, and I saw her hands ball up into fists before the hallway door swung shut behind us. I told Stephanie that any real paternity test had to go through the courts with proper supervision, not some paper she pulled from her purse. She started crying again and grabbed at my shirt, but I stepped back and told her to stop. The VA security guard poked his head around the corner to check on us, and I gave him a quick nod that we were okay. Stephanie tried to follow when I walked back out, but the guard stepped between us and asked if she had an appointment. I left her arguing with him while Olivia and I went out the side door to the parking lot. We didn't talk the whole drive home, and I spent the rest of that day staring at the ceiling trying to process what just happened. The next morning, I woke up early and called Annalisa Kim at the VA to check on my coverage and make sure my prosthetic appointments were still scheduled. She pulled up my file and confirmed everything was set for the next 6 months and asked if I was doing okay since she could hear something was off in my voice. She mentioned they had emergency mental health slots open if I needed to talk to someone, and I wrote down the number, but didn't commit to anything yet. After I hung up, Olivia came into the kitchen and sat down across from me at our small table. She pushed hard about getting a lawyer involved right away and said her dad knew someone good who handled this kind of mess. My pride wanted to handle it myself without dragging more people into my problems, but she grabbed my hand and said this was too big to face alone. She was right, and I knew it, even though accepting help still felt like weakness after everything. 2 days later, we drove downtown to meet with Melinda Goodwin in her office on the 3rd floor of an old brick building. She had gray hair pulled back tight and reading glasses on a chain around her neck. Olivia's dad had called ahead, so she already knew the basics, but she wanted to hear everything from the start. I showed her the bank statements with all the transfers to Kyle going back 4 months, and she took photos of each page with her phone. Then I pulled up the video from Chili's on my phone, and she watched Kyle making out with that blonde woman while wearing his wedding ring. She wrote notes on a yellow legal pad the whole time, asking questions about dates and amounts, and whether I had any emails or texts from Stephanie about the money. When I finished talking, she set down her pen and explained that we needed to preserve every piece of evidence and avoid any contact with Stephanie except through legal channels from now on. She started typing up demand letters for the stolen money right there while we watched and pulled out forms for the paternity issue that would need to be filed with the court. She said Kyle and Stephanie had committed clear fraud, and we had a strong case, but these things take time to work through the system. My phone buzzed on her desk, and Stephanie's name popped up with a text saying she needed to talk to me privately about the baby and our future. I took a screenshot, forwarded it to Melinda's email, then typed back that all communication needed to go through our attorneys now. Melinda nodded and added the screenshot to her file. 3 days after that meeting, I had my first trauma therapy session with Tyrone Ainsworth at the VA. He was a tall black man with kind eyes who'd been an army medic before becoming a therapist. I sat in his small office with the fake plant in the corner and finally said out loud how scared I was about maybe being a father. The anger at Stephanie mixed up with guilt about possibly walking away from a kid who didn't ask for any of this. Tyrone helped me start sorting through those feelings without judging me for being confused and angry at the same time. That evening, Olivia and I sat on our couch and had a hard conversation about what would happen if the baby turned out to be mine. We talked through boundaries with Stephanie and how we'd handle sharing custody without letting her manipulate the situation. Olivia said she'd support whatever I decided, but we both agreed on never letting Stephanie back into our personal lives, no matter what the test showed. The next morning, her dad stopped by with coffee and a check. He sat at our kitchen table and offered to cover Melinda's retainer fee until we could get money back from Kyle and Stephanie. I wanted to say no, but he reminded me that soldiers look out for each other, and this was what family did. I swallowed my pride and took the check, promising to pay him back every penny as soon as possible. The next morning, my phone started blowing up with notifications from some military blog called Honor Watch, asking for an interview about being left at the altar. And I showed the messages to Melinda, who told me to ignore everything and stay off social media completely while she handled the legal stuff. 2 days after that, we drove to the police station downtown, where I sat in a small room with a detective who looked tired and went through every single bank transfer to Kyle's account, while Olivia held the folder with all our printed statements. The detective took photos of each page and typed notes into his computer, saying it was clearly theft, but these cases move through the system slow, and we shouldn't expect quick results. That same afternoon, while I was at the gym trying to clear my head, an email came through from Stephanie with the subject line, "Please read," and it was 3 pages of her saying she was homeless and sleeping in her car and hadn't eaten in 2 days and was thinking about ending everything. I forwarded it straight to Melinda, who sent it to social services with a list of shelters and food banks, while reminding me to maintain the no-contact boundary we'd set up. The following Monday, Melinda filed paperwork with the court asking for an official paternity test with proper chain of custody, since we couldn't trust whatever Stephanie had shown me at the VA. She called that afternoon to say the hearing was scheduled for next week and warned me my anxiety would probably get worse as the date got closer, which turned out to be completely right. I barely slept for 3 nights straight until I called Annalisa at the VA and asked if she could move up my prosthetic fitting since the stress was making my stump hurt more than usual. She got me in 2 days later, and while adjusting the socket, she quietly added some mental health referrals to my file without making a big deal about it, even though she clearly knew something was wrong. At my next session with Tyrone, he taught me this breathing pattern where you inhale for 4 counts and hold for 4 and exhale for 6, which sounded stupid, but actually worked when I tried it that night. For the first time in weeks, I got 5 straight hours of sleep without waking up in a cold sweat thinking about IEDs or Stephanie or the baby situation. The next evening, Olivia and I were eating takeout Chinese when she brought up our wedding plans and said maybe we should postpone until all the legal stuff was done, which made sense, but still hurt to hear out loud. We sat there picking at our food and agreed to delay everything quietly without telling anyone yet, since we didn't want to deal with questions from family and friends about why we were waiting. 3 days before the court hearing, Melinda called, asking permission to share the video from Chili's with Chelsea, who was representing Kyle's wife in their divorce case. She explained it could help us get leverage for recovering the stolen money, since Kyle would want to avoid having that video come out in his own divorce proceedings. I told her to send it, and hoped it would make Kyle nervous enough to settle, instead of fighting us in court for months. The morning of the hearing, I put on my only suit, and Olivia drove us to the courthouse where we went through metal detectors and found the right courtroom on the 3rd floor. The judge was an older woman with gray hair who looked at the paperwork and ordered official chain of custody testing at a certified lab with results to be sent directly to the court. Stephanie sat 2 rows behind us, looking rough with unwashed hair and the same clothes she'd been wearing at the VA, but Kyle wasn't there at all, which his lawyer said was because of a work conflict. After the judge dismissed us, I walked out first and was almost to the elevator when I heard footsteps behind me in the hallway. Stephanie was standing there looking exhausted and much thinner than before, with dark circles under her eyes and her hands shaking slightly. Something in my chest tightened seeing her like that, but I kept walking past without saying anything and pressed the elevator button while Olivia caught up and grabbed my hand. The elevator doors opened, and we stepped inside with 2 other people who kept staring at us, probably recognizing me from the courthouse drama. Requested Reds is on Spotify now. Check out link in the description or comments. 2 days later, I drove to the lab address Melinda had texted me for the official DNA test. The building was one of those generic medical complexes with beige walls and that weird antiseptic smell that always made my stomach turn. Cormac Marshall met me in the waiting room, a tall guy with glasses who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. He took me back to a small room and explained the whole process while pulling on latex gloves. The swab felt weird against the inside of my cheek, and he sealed it in 3 different bags with signatures on each one. He said results would take 2 weeks minimum because of the court's chain of custody requirements. I walked out to find Olivia sitting in my car reading a book, not wanting to make things more tense by coming inside. The next morning, Melinda called while I was doing my prosthetic exercises and said Kyle's lawyer had sent over a settlement offer. $5,000 total with no admission of wrongdoing and a clause saying I couldn't pursue any further legal action. She actually laughed when she read it to me. She said it was insulting and started preparing the full civil suit paperwork that afternoon. 3 days later, Olivia's dad showed up at our apartment unannounced with a folder of printouts about criminal fraud statutes. He paced around our living room for 20 minutes explaining how we could get both Kyle and Stephanie arrested for theft and fraud. His face got red when he talked about Kyle taking advantage of a disabled veteran. I had my weekly session with Tyrone that afternoon and spent most of it talking about whether I wanted revenge or just wanted this whole thing to end. Tyrone had me write down my values on index cards and then sort them by priority. Safety came first, then peace, then justice. We talked about how criminal charges might feel good, but wouldn't actually get my money back faster. The next week, Annalisa called to say my new prosthetic socket was ready for fitting. I'd been having bad pain where the old one rubbed against my stump, sometimes so bad I couldn't walk for hours. The new socket had better padding and a different angle that took pressure off the sore spots. After the adjustment, I went straight to the pool and managed 3 full laps without stopping. My arms burned and my lungs felt ready to explode, but I touched the wall for the 3rd time and actually smiled. Small victories still counted as victories. 4 days later, my phone started blowing up with texts from people I hadn't talked to since high school. Some gossip website had picked up the wedding story and turned it into this crazy love triangle thing with made-up quotes and old Facebook photos. The headline said something about a war hero's bride running off with her secret lover while his best friend waited in the wings. Melinda texted me within an hour telling me not to respond to anything and definitely not to post on social media. She said these things blow over faster if you stay completely silent. The following Monday, the court sent a letter saying I could attend the next prenatal appointment as the potential father. Stephanie had apparently requested I not be there, but the judge overruled her. The appointment was at a clinic downtown, and I sat in the waiting room for 40 minutes before they called us back. Stephanie wouldn't look at me and kept her arms crossed over her stomach. The technician squeezed gel on her belly and moved the wand around until we heard it. That rapid whoosh 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 sound filled the room, and my chest got tight. The baby's heartbeat was real and strong, and suddenly, everything felt more complicated. I left the clinic and sat in my car for an hour just staring at the steering wheel. Part of me had been hoping this was all some sick joke, but that heartbeat made it real. That night, Olivia found me at the kitchen table with a legal pad trying to figure out custody schedules. She sat down, and we spent 3 hours drafting a realistic plan for if the baby turned out to be mine. We wrote down everything from pickup times to holiday schedules to how we'd handle medical decisions. Both of us cried at different points, but by the end, we had 5 pages of notes that made us feel slightly more prepared for whatever came next. 2 days later, Melinda forwarded me a new email from Kyle's attorney. This time, they were offering $20,000, but with a non-disclosure agreement attached. The NDA said I couldn't talk about the affair, the stolen money, or anything related to Kyle and Stephanie ever again. Melinda explained that $20,000 was better than $5,000, but still way less than what they'd stolen. She also said NDAs were tricky, because violating them even accidentally could mean paying everything back, plus penalties. I had my session with Tyrone the next day, and we spent the whole hour talking about what closure actually meant to me. He asked if getting money back was worth never being able to tell my story. We talked about how silence can feel like shame, even when you've done nothing wrong. By the end of the session, I realized that keeping my voice mattered more to me than quick cash. I called Melinda that afternoon and told her to reject the NDA offer completely. She said she'd already drafted the full lawsuit papers and warned me things would probably get uglier before they got better. I told her I was ready for whatever came next. 2 days later, my phone buzzed with a text from Stephanie asking for $800 for rent or she'd be evicted by Friday. I took a screenshot of the message and sent it straight to Melinda, who replied within 10 minutes with a whole list of housing assistance programs and food banks in the area. She told me not to respond at all and to keep documenting everything. The next morning, Melinda called me while I was doing my physical therapy exercises and said Chelsea Chavez had just contacted her about Kyle's wife filing for separation. Apparently, his wife wanted to cooperate with our case and had bank records showing Kyle had been hiding money from her too. It felt good knowing we weren't the only ones who'd been played, but I also felt bad about their kids getting caught up in all this mess. I was still thinking about that when the lab called 3 days later, saying the paternity results got delayed another week because of some backlog in processing. My chest got tight, and I could feel my heart racing, so I used those breathing exercises Tyrone taught me, counting 4 seconds in, holding for 4, then 4 seconds out. It took about 5 minutes, but I managed to calm down enough to finish the call without losing it. That same afternoon, I got a letter from the VA saying they'd approved a retroactive reimbursement for medical expenses from the past year, which came out to about $3,000. It wasn't much compared to everything we'd lost, but Olivia and I sat at the kitchen table figuring out which bills to pay first. We decided to catch up on my prosthetic maintenance and put the rest toward credit card debt from when I couldn't work. A week later, I was at Target buying a baby shower gift for my buddy from rehab when I walked past the newborn section and just froze. All those tiny clothes and happy couples picking out cribs hit me like a truck, and I couldn't breathe. My hands started shaking and I dropped the gift bag I was holding and had to get out of there immediately. I made it to my car and sat there with my head on the steering wheel, trying to remember what Tyrone said about grounding myself. I called his emergency line and he picked up on the second ring. He walked me through the exercises, telling me to name 5 things I could see, 4 I could touch, 3 I could hear, 2 I could smell, and 1 I could taste. 20 minutes later, I was stable enough to drive home, and Olivia met me at the door with a glass of water and no questions about why I came back without the gift. The following Monday, Melinda officially filed the civil suit against Kyle and Stephanie for conversion and unjust enrichment, asking for $60,000 in damages plus legal fees. She said the court date got set for 3 months out, which seemed like forever, but apparently that was actually pretty fast for civil court. 2 weeks after that, we got a notice saying the court was ordering mediation before the trial to try reaching a settlement without going through a whole court battle. Melinda said it was standard procedure, and most cases settled during mediation, but I was skeptical about Kyle and Stephanie suddenly becoming reasonable. The mediation got scheduled for a Tuesday morning at some office building downtown. Kyle showed up in an expensive suit looking smug, while Stephanie sat in the corner wearing old jeans and wouldn't make eye contact with anyone. The mediator was this older woman who kept talking about finding common ground and moving forward. About an hour in, Kyle made some comment about how I was just a bitter cripple trying to get money I didn't deserve. Olivia's dad jumped up from his chair so fast it fell over, and I had to grab his arm to keep him from going after Kyle. The mediator called for a break, and I spent 10 minutes in the hallway talking Olivia's dad down, while Melinda worked on Kyle's attorney. When we came back in, Kyle's lawyer had obviously told him to shut up because he didn't say another word the rest of the session. After 4 hours of back and forth, we finally reached a settlement where Kyle would pay $30,000 over 2 years in monthly payments, and Stephanie agreed to wage garnishment for $10,000 from whatever job she got next. Nobody had to admit wrongdoing, which really bothered me, but Melinda explained that going to trial was risky, and this guaranteed we'd get at least $40,000 back. Kyle's attorney drew up the paperwork right there, and everyone signed before they could change their minds. Walking out of that office building, I didn't feel victorious or relieved, just tired and ready for this whole thing to be over. 3 weeks after the settlement, I was sitting at my kitchen table sorting through bills when the mailman knocked on my door with a certified letter that needed my signature. My hands shook a little as I signed for it because I knew what it was before I even opened it. The lab's logo was printed on the envelope, and inside was a single piece of paper with test results that made my knees go weak. The DNA test showed 0% chance I was the father, but a 99.9% match to Kyle. I read it 3 times to make sure I wasn't seeing things wrong, and then the relief hit me so hard I barely made it to the bathroom before I threw up. I sat on the bathroom floor for a while, feeling this weird mix of relief and something else I couldn't name at first, until I realized it was grief for a kid that was never mine, but that I'd been thinking about for weeks. Olivia found me there 20 minutes later and just sat down next to me on the cold tile without saying anything. She held my hand while I told her about the results and how messed up I felt, being both happy and sad at the same time. We stayed up most of that night talking about whether we wanted kids someday and what that would look like for us without all this drama hanging over our heads. The next morning, I called Melinda and asked her to send Stephanie formal paperwork, saying she couldn't contact me directly anymore and that everything had to go through lawyers from now on. Melinda drew up the documents that afternoon and sent them by courier to Stephanie's last known address. 2 days later, we got confirmation that Stephanie had signed everything without any pushback, which surprised me since I expected her to fight it. Olivia and I went down to the courthouse that week to reschedule our wedding from the big venue we'd booked to just a simple ceremony in the judge's chambers next month. The clerk who helped us was really nice and didn't ask any questions when we said we wanted something small with just 10 people max. We decided to only invite our immediate families and a couple close friends instead of the 100+ people we'd originally planned for. My next therapy session with Tyrone was different, because instead of talking about Stephanie and all that mess we started working on, who I was beyond being a soldier, and beyond all this recent drama. He had me do this exercise where I wrote down everything I thought defined me, and then we went through crossing off the things that were about my service, or my injuries, or what happened to me, instead of who I actually am. It was harder than I expected, and I only had like 3 things left on the list when we were done, which really made me think. Tyrone helped me see that I'd been defining myself by my trauma for so long that I forgot there was more to me than just surviving bad stuff. 2 weeks later, Annalisa from the VA called to confirm my prosthetic care plan was all set for the next 5 years and asked if I wanted to join a peer support group for veterans. I was nervous about sitting in a room with strangers talking about personal stuff, but I figured it couldn't be worse than everything else I'd been through lately, so I signed up. The first meeting was in this small room at the VA, with about 8 other vets sitting in a circle on those uncomfortable plastic chairs. The facilitator asked if anyone wanted to share, and before I could stop myself, I was telling them the whole messy story about Stephanie and Kyle and the stolen money and everything. 3 guys nodded along like they'd heard similar stories before, and one older vet said his ex-wife did almost the same thing while he was deployed. Nobody judged me or acted like I was stupid for not seeing it coming, which felt better than I expected. After the meeting, a couple guys came up and shared their own stories about getting screwed over by people they trusted, and it made me realize this kind of thing happens more than people talk about. The first of the month came and went without Kyle's settlement payment showing up in my account, so Melinda called his lawyer and found out he was already trying to dodge the agreement. She didn't waste any time filing the consent judgment paperwork that would let the court garnish his wages directly from his employer. Kyle's lawyer tried to argue for more time, but the judge wasn't having it since Kyle had signed the settlement agreement, knowing what the payment schedule was. Within 2 weeks, the court approved the automatic garnishment, which meant Kyle's employer would have to take the money straight from his paycheck and send it to me, whether Kyle liked it or not. Melinda explained it would take longer to get all the money this way, but at least it was guaranteed to come eventually, instead of hoping Kyle would do the right thing. I spent an afternoon writing a short statement online about setting boundaries and focusing on healing, without going into all the dirty details. As soon as I posted it, I turned off all the comments and notifications because I didn't want to deal with random people's opinions or the trolls who always show up on those kinds of posts. It felt good to say something publicly on my own terms, without having to defend myself or explain everything to strangers who didn't really care anyway. 3 nights later, Olivia asked if I wanted to go swimming at the community pool after it closed, since her friend worked there and could let us in. We drove over around 11, and the place was completely dark, except for the underwater lights making everything glow blue. I slipped into the water first, and the temperature was perfect. Not too cold like during lap practice. Olivia jumped in next to me, and we just floated on our backs looking at the stars through the glass ceiling. Neither of us talked for maybe 20 minutes, and it felt good to be in water without having to prove anything to anybody. My prosthetic was sitting on a chair by the pool, and for once I didn't care about getting back to it quickly. The water held me up just fine on its own. 2 days after that, Melinda called to say she was sending out the final paperwork to everyone involved in the case. She mailed certified letters to Kyle and Stephanie, confirming the settlement amounts and payment schedules, along with the no-contact orders that would stay in place forever. She also included a list of job training programs and housing resources for Stephanie, even though we didn't have to do that. The legal part of this whole mess was officially done, even if my brain was still processing everything that happened. Melinda said the court would handle enforcement from here, and I should focus on moving forward with my life. That weekend, Olivia's dad came over with a six-pack and sat on our couch looking uncomfortable. He cleared his throat about 5 times before finally saying he was sorry for pushing so hard about filing criminal charges against Stephanie and Kyle. He said he got carried away because he was mad about what they did to me, but he understood why I chose the settlement instead. We talked for 2 hours about how sometimes peace is better than revenge, and how carrying anger just makes you tired. He shook my hand when he left and said he'd respect whatever boundaries Olivia and I set going forward. The next morning, I went to the bank with my military medals in a shoebox and rented a safe deposit box for $20 a year. I put everything inside, including my Purple Heart and Bronze Star, and turned the key feeling weird about locking away things that used to define me. The bank lady asked if I was sure I wanted to store them instead of displaying them, and I just nodded. Building a new life meant not living in the old one anymore, even if that felt strange. 3 weeks later, we got married at the courthouse on a Tuesday morning with just 10 people watching. Olivia wore a simple white dress she bought online for $60 and looked more beautiful than any bride I'd ever seen. Tyrone showed up, even though it was his day off because he said he wouldn't miss it for anything. The judge read the standard vows, and we both started crying when we said "I do," because we actually meant it this time. No fancy venue or 200 guests or $40,000 price tag, just 2 people who knew what real love looked like. After the ceremony, we all went to this Italian place for lunch, and everyone was laughing and telling stories. About halfway through the meal, the restaurant started playing some country song about soldiers coming home, and suddenly, I was back in that helicopter with blood everywhere. I stood up fast and walked outside where I could breathe, while Olivia followed me out. She didn't say anything stupid like, "It's okay," or "You're safe now," because she knew that didn't help. Instead, she just stood next to me and matched my breathing until my heart stopped racing. We went back inside after 10 minutes, and nobody made a big deal about it, which I appreciated. 2 months later, the first garnishment payment from Kyle showed up in my account for $1,500. We used it to pay off the last of my medical debt from the prosthetic rejection surgery and had enough left over to sign up as volunteer coaches for the adaptive swim program at the Y. The kids there didn't care about my missing leg or my gold medal. They just wanted someone to teach them how to float without being scared. 3 different news outlets called that month, wanting to pay for exclusive rights to our story, but we turned them all down. Some things weren't meant to be entertainment for strangers on the internet. A full year after everything went down, I ran into Stephanie at the grocery store and almost didn't recognize her. She was wearing a uniform from some restaurant and looked healthier than she had during all the court stuff. She saw me and started to walk over, but then noticed Olivia next to me and changed direction toward the exit instead. Later, I found out from Melinda that she was in a job training program and making her garnishment payments on time every month. Kyle was apparently in court-ordered counseling for his gambling problem, and his wages were still being garnished automatically. His wife divorced him and got everything in the settlement, including their house. Olivia and I bought a small place with a garden out back, using her VA loan since mine was tied up in the apartment. We planted tomatoes and peppers and spent evenings sitting on the porch planning what we wanted to do next. The prosthetic works fine now, and I swim twice a week just for fun, not for medals or proving anything. Sometimes I still wake up with nightmares, but Olivia knows how to help me through them. We're talking about maybe having kids in a couple years once we save up more money. Life feels quiet and normal in a way I never thought I'd have after everything that happened. And there you go. Another thrilling episode of me oversharing on the internet. Want more? Yeah, I don't know why either, but you can subscribe for it.